I'm sorry that you guys can't see me, but we're going to a haunted car wash on Halloween. We are driving on a road with nothing but dirt next to us to get to this car wash. So that's kind of scary. There's like no other cars. That's nice.
State.
Yes.
You can check out the other episodes after this
It's
video.
literally my favorite to
Don't
listen
worry,
to.
you don't have to listen to them in order. Thank you to everyone who's emailed in their stories so far.
What is
Now,
this?
get
They're
ready
scary stories.
as we
Be
approach
quiet.
the halfway point of our journey down Route 666. I've always been the outdoorsy type, and whenever I have some free time, I like to get out into nature. This particular day, I was hiking in Malheur National Forest in Oregon, a beautiful part of the country. It was a weekday, so I was out there by myself. Not that that bothered me. I was used to solo hiking. Plus, it was broad daylight outside. That, paired with the beautiful scenery, didn't exactly fill me with a deep sense of dread. It took me about an hour to drive from my home to the spot I planned to hike in, a secluded part of the forest where I figured I'd be alone. I parked my vehicle in an area where there was no other cars around, hopped out and threw on my backpack. Then I set off into the woods. The sky was blue, the air fresh, and the trees were lush. A perfect day for a walk in the woods. No more than 2 minutes in, however, I stumbled upon something I wish I hadn't. It started with the strange noises. A guttural chanting. Sounded like 5 or 6 human voices, all speaking gibberish in a melodic fashion. I could only hear it faintly in the distance, but curiosity got the better of me. I made my way through the brush, intent on seeing who else was out in this secluded part of the forest. Once when I saw them, it was like a scene straight out of a David Lynch movie. 6 people standing in a wide circle, all their faces covered in poor quality papier-mâché masks. One was what looked like a pig, one a hare. I couldn't even make out what the others were supposed to be. None of them were wearing shirts, and their torsos were covered in what looked like white paint.
What happened to the story?
I know, hold on. We have to wait a little bit past on
Oh.
How long is it?
About 6 hours, buddy.
Alright, 6-hour nap.
If that is true,
They were moving their bodies in a strange, wave-like motion.
we're in a place where it's like service, no service.
They must have been off their heads on some sort of chemical. It looked like they might have been standing around something on the ground, but I couldn't make out what it was. Before I could turn around and get out of there, one of them caught sight of me. I'll never forget that image. It was so bizarre and terrifying, all at the same time. A man in a bootleg white rabbit mask pointing in my direction. And then, in unison, all these other masked figures turning to look at me. I immediately turned and bolted back to my car. Behind me, I could hear the breaking of twigs, the rustling of foliage, and multiple sets of footsteps. The worst part was the screaming. Wild screaming. The masked figures were in hot pursuit, chasing close behind me. What the hell did they want? From the sound of their wails, I could hear that they were gaining on me. I ditched the bag on my back to lighten the load. I was fit enough to outrun those lunatics, but not with that thing slowing me down. In 30 seconds, I was back at my car. In another 10 seconds, more of them had appeared from other parts of the surrounding forest. Couldn't have been less than 20 of them now. A menagerie of psychos, all throwing rocks and sticks at my vehicle, charging directly at it, the fastest ones clawing at the windows. I floored it in reverse and managed to back out of there just before my car was surrounded. I spun the vehicle around and slammed my foot on the accelerator. As I sped down the muddy trail, I could see the masked figures in my mirrors. They were still running after me, still screaming, but thankfully losing distance. When I was far enough away, they sidelined back into the trees and out of my vision. That was the last I saw of them. I debated whether or not to report the incident. In the end, I decided I would. I told the authorities what had happened to me, and they told me that they'd checked the place out. Never heard back from them. I don't think they took my call too seriously, which, honestly, bothers me. A few people have gone missing in those woods over the years. It'd be nice if they saw this as a potential lead. I get what I told them must have sounded crazy, but still, for the sake of the missing, you know. I have no idea what I stumbled into in my think, but my gut tells me it was some crazy type of ritual. This only happened to me last year, so if you're listening to this, and you're planning to head out to Malheur National Forest, please take precautions, because there's something strange going on out in those woods.
Well, it's nice to know. Like, honestly, bigger than
It's no secret in my family that my grandpa used to be part of them. Back when the casino started booming, he was working out in Las Vegas, protecting his mafia family's interests. What his exact role was, I can't say for sure. He was sort of a mid-level guy. Not a kingpin, not a grunt. Now I'm telling this story, but I don't expect you to feel any sympathy for the guy. He did some bad things in his youth, that's for sure, but he did make amends later in life. He made a series of confessions to my father, believing that if he took his secrets to the grave, he'd be doomed to hell. He was never proud of his past, and he wanted to repent a little, I suppose. My father then passed those tales on to me. There are several stories I could share with you here, but I'll just tell one from his time out in the garden. One which, if true, I find particularly disturbing. A few other gangsters in my grandpa's crew had been caught stealing from their boss, shaving a little extra off the side and pocketing it for themselves. This wasn't their first offense, and the boss wanted to make an example of them. The poor guys weren't the smartest, and didn't even realize they'd been rumbled until it was too late. The three of them were rounded up, bound and gagged, and tossed into car trucks. about 14 other guys drove them out into the middle of the desert. My grandpa was there with them, riding in the same car as the boss. Far from civilization, they popped the trunks and dragged the 3 men out. My grandpa's boss gave some speech about how they had wronged him and how they were now going to pay the price. He untied their hands and feet and tossed each of them a shovel, told them to start digging 3 deep holes. Since all of the boss's henchmen were armed, they didn't exactly have a choice in the matter. The men tried to plead with the boss, but nobody could understand what they were saying through the gags in their mouths. My grandpa didn't want to be a part of this. He knew these guys after all. Still, there was nothing he could really do. If he spoke out against the boss or tried to leave, then they'd likely fall cold as the desert. The men finished digging their pits, which, as instructed by the boss, were much deeper than they were wide.
Oh, y'all can see me
Then,
now.
at gunpoint, he had them get inside their makeshift tubes. The other henchmen began to fill in the holes with earth and sand, compressing it all tightly together, leaving only their 3 heads poking out of the ground. They couldn't move, they couldn't talk. All they could do
Oh my cow.
was pray. According to my grandpa, the boss then placed a bottle of water about 10 feet in front of them.
Now
with the
the
top
wedding's gonna be good, hopefully.
"This is the only thing out here that'll keep you alive," he said. "And you're gonna watch as it evaporates in front of you. That is, peasants don't take your eyes out first." Then
Jinx
they all
knows
hopped
how.
back in their cars and left the 3 men there, buried in the scorching heat. On the way back to Vegas, the boss sat silently, looking out the car window. He turned to my grandpa. "The water," he said. "What about it, boss?" "I'm just thinking, if one of them manages to shake himself free, I wonder if he'll share it." It didn't really matter, my grandpa thought. Those men were so far out in that desert that they'd never make it back alive anyway. It was just a question of how long they lasted. My grandpa managed to escape his life of crime a few years later. His wife, my grandma, had just given birth to my father, and even though he was still a young man, he figured it was time for a fresh start. He never spoke out against his former colleagues, I guess for obvious reasons, and somehow he managed to escape without being whacked. Must have made some kind of deal. For his future family's sake, I'm glad he did. Here's a glitch in the Matrix that's kept me up for more than a few nights. For as long as I can remember, I've had a memory that apparently never even happened to me. It's extremely vivid, almost like I can feel what's happening in the memory itself whenever I think about it. The memory stayed the same since I was a kid. It starts with this horrible, pale man looking in at me through a window.
Oh,
His skin is so thin, it's almost translucent.
oh, that's scary.
His eyes are a sickly yellow, and they're sunken deep in his skull. His whole face is emaciated and bony, and his mouth is contorted into a menacing smile. In a flash, he's in the same room as me. I don't know where we are. Some sort of dark, featureless place. But it's just the 2 of us, and I have no idea why I'm there. The pale man slowly approaches me with his arms outstretched, and I'm overcome with this feeling of pure fear. Then, pure pain. Next thing I know, I'm in a hospital on a stretcher, being wheeled into the emergency room. I can't really feel the lower half of my body, and everything's a little blurry. The doctors have concerned looks on their faces, and one of them keeps repeating, "Stay with me, Tom. Stay with me, Tom." The strange thing is, my name's not Tom. It's Jason. I look up at the doctor talking to me. I still remember his face like it was yesterday. Paper-thin lips, a brown moustache, piercing blue eyes, a big mole over his eyebrow. The scene goes on like that until I lose consciousness. Then, everything goes black. That's where the memory ends. As a child, I brought the memory up to my parents. They assured me I had never been rushed to the hospital, let alone to the emergency room. Throughout the years, I'd periodically bring it back up whenever it popped into my head. Still, they'd always tell me I was just remembering some weird nightmare or something. For the longest time, I put it down to me watching some kind of scary movie before bed, and my young, impressionable mind confusing a dream with reality. When I was 18, my family and I moved to Chicago. I had a minor medical problem that needed monitoring, and I needed to make a trip to the local hospital. I was sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by a handful of other people. An old lady, a mother and a child, and a man with his head burrowed in a newspaper. Eventually, the doctor came and called my name. I looked up at him, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the doctor from my false memory. The same thin lips, piercing blue eyes, even the same distinctive mole over his eyebrow. He looked older, sure. His moustache was more grey than brown now, and there were a few deep wrinkles on his skin, but there was no mistaking it. If that memory really never happened to me, then how was that even possible? My heart began to race as I stood up and moved towards him. With a reassuring smile, he ushered me into the examination room. Now, in private and up close, I was able to get an even better look at the guy. It was him all right. He wasn't just a character from a dream at all. But if that experience from my memory had never really happened, how could I have known this man's face? Why had it been stuck in my head for my entire life? During his examination, I told him he looked familiar. He assured me we had never met. I grew up in Texas, and he'd never even been there. Not to mention, there was no record of me as a patient there, and the doctor said he had a keen eye for faces. I figured it was some kind of weird coincidence, or sort of mind glitch. My brain must have been making a connection that wasn't really there. Still, I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. The doctor finished up his examination, told me everything looked good. He then gave me a smile and showed me the door. I walked out into the waiting room, and the doctor called his next patient. It was the man with his head in his newspaper, sitting just to the right of me. He stood up and towered over the doctor and I. Couldn't have been less than 6'6". He came to pass me, and I